What is it that separates humans from animals? 20 miles is the answer, the distance of the English Channel, but it goes without saying that this perspective of barbarous savagery across the sleeve goes both ways. But despite this rather close proximity, it really begs the question of many Britons: how have the vibes between us and these backward heathens, these cretinous twinks, become so soggy? In the same way that they might ask of us, well, I don't quite know, actually. They all speak foreign, you see, but what are the historic reasons for this divide? And why does Euroscepticism seem so uniquely British? And how have we become so estranged? Is European integration inevitable, or are we destined to continue our slow drift away from one another? Coincidentally, it's over that very same 20-mile stretch of water 1,000 years ago that our story begins, with William the Conqueror. And as his name might suggest, this was the dastardly Frenchman that conquered England following the Battle of Hastings in 1066. A moment of silence for our dear Harold. The man died from lag, and I won't hear anything to the contrary. He was far too base to be remembered in the way that he is. He was the fucking guy.
He's not the guy.
Now, while this event isn't massively informative in and of itself, it just so happens that 1,000 years of war with your closest point of contact to said continent kind of is, which directly leads us to the 100 years kerfuffle. You see, William's Norman dynasty would lay claim to all of France, seeking to unite the two kingdoms under Plantagenet rule.
Make it England! Make it England!
And at their height, all of these territories were directly held by the English. But by the 16th century, these acquisitions had been steadily eroded, and it's the loss of these vast mainland territories that initially pushed England out of the way in regard to broader mainland entanglements, geographically limiting their sphere more or less to their own pile of rocks. The birth of Monkey Island, hallowed be thy name. Now, this meant that when Martin Luther, the pre-Netflix one, hammered his feces to the door, what can I say? Steer clear of German pornography, they're a frighteningly kinky bunch for such autistic weirdos, don't let them fool you. He kicked off the European Reformations. This would divide Europe along these religious political lines, Protestant and Catholic.
This is huge history happening, isn't it?
It's bigger than that, Chris, it's large.
And it's from this point that Britain starts to slowly but noticeably drift away. Why? King Barry VIII. Now, he may well have been an obese sack of shit, but there is a reason that weirdos like me are still talking about him. He is undoubtedly one of the most significant figures in British history. You see, he needed a divorce from his wife. A 5-star effort for cultural assimilation to Monkey Island, if you ask me. Justice for Cathy.
It's over, April!
However, Big Basil wasn't the kind of man to let something as cringe as the bedrock of Western civilization and the centre of his very subjects' lives get between him and a wife speedrun record. So the only logical step forward, start your own reformation, your own church with blackjack and hookers. Anglicanism. You see, the English Reformation sealed this divide. While much of Europe remained either Catholic or embraced different flavours of Protestantism, England created its own church, a confusing mixture of the two, with the king at its head. They're intertwining the political and the religious, a god-emperor, if you will. Now, why does this matter quite so much? Isn't religion just gay, I hear you ask? Well, it's important for two big reasons. Firstly, it didn't lock Britain into any continental commitments, alliances or blocs. Yes, Anglicanism was rather quickly becoming far more in league with Protestant ideals, but it wasn't clear-cut. England and later Britain had far more flexibility and independence in regard to the religious politics so dominant at the time, and this could be seen by their notable absence from the 30 Years' War, a conflict that sought to figure out once and for all whether or not our priests could indeed beat up your priests, and we see this through Britain's eternal love affair with dear Catholic Portugal, but also Elizabeth's decisive naval victory over Catholic Spain in 1588, the Battle of the Armada. Now, the Battle of the Armada is incredibly important. While it didn't break the Spanish kingdom, it certainly gave them a bloody nose.
Noses can't break, anyway, that's a myth.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Serving as the springboard for England and later Britain's naval supremacy that sees its focus shift from looking to Europe to looking inward to now looking to the broader world. A reoccurring theme you will start to notice, a very common rhetoric seen all throughout British history, all the way into the present.
What we'd be doing is getting out of political union with Europe and rejoining the world.
But secondly, I want you to cast your ADHD-riddled minds back, well, about 30 seconds ago, actually, when I said that Anglicanism was distinctively separate from, but rapidly becoming more in line with Protestant ideals. Now, why is this so important? Because by fostering concepts such as individualism and questioning of traditional authority, Protestantism paves the way for what we like to describe in the academic circles as the utter woke nonsense era, known to the common pleb as the Enlightenment. Now, it's hard to overstate just how much Europe changed throughout this period, and when we think of the quintessential enlightened nation, more often than not our minds turn to countries like France and their famed philosophers like Voltaire and Rousseau, even Prussia with Frederick the Great and Immanuel Kant. But the one nation you very rarely hear mentioned in this conversation is Britain, which is very odd when you think of the events that transpired across the Channel over those enlightened centuries. In the same way that Britain had its own reformations, this informed and in turn led to its own unique enlightenment, parallel to the broader continent. You see, while Europe was busy farming karma on reddit.gov, discussing and debating these core philosophies, individualism and questioning traditional authority, Britain was out here beheading kings, fighting demonic war poodles, and establishing the first semblance of representative democracy here in this 40k imperial battleship of a building, in direct contrast to the absolutist tyrants that still dominated mainland Reddit. mainland Europe. Values that Britain would export to their colonies. They were no longer this weird vitamin D starved gremlin muttering to themselves in the corner. Now they were a vitamin D starved mother of, well, their own international community that they had far more in common with than the rest of mainland Europe, unwashed, savage colonial heathens that they might have been. But beggars cannot be choosers. It would be nothing but monkey business from here on out.
He's the first member of the DK crew.
So, how is it that despite embodying these enlightened ideals more so than any other nation on neither side of the Channel, does Britain really enter this conversation beside the odd scientist or philosopher? It's almost like there is this silent, parallel distinction between what we think of as British history and European history. But once again, these events further entrenched this divide, only this time it was political, which is very unfortunate because in just the same way that the Reformations paved the way for the Enlightenment, so too did the Enlightenment for the Revolutionary era. God is dead and politics is the new religion. Who'd have thunk it? We haven't moved on quite as much as we might like to think. And Britain is looking across the Channel as France beheads their king and commits a borderline political genocide on their own people throughout the terror of the French Revolution, and they're absolutely horrified, as was the rest of Europe, to be fair, but Britain in particular. You see, they had done this 150 years ago, and it didn't involve top 1% Twitter posters rotting in their own baths advocating political violence.
Let's talk to this man, looks like he has AIDS and I don't understand.
Yeah, I know, how very modern, but the point is, it hadn't looked anything like this. From the British perspective, the French were not the champions of the Enlightenment, they were perverting it and burning down the world in the process, as the Twitter rhetoric was rapidly evolving into 4chan rhetoric, by which I mean to say, a well-written half-page of political doctrine was now simply being met with a response just calling them a gay retard and telling them to drop a toaster into said proverbial bath. Now, the French Revolution was, very possibly, if not certainly, the most significant moment of transformation for the modern, recognisable British identity. Now, unfortunately, I don't really have the space to venture into it in this video, but if it does interest you, I talk about it a little further in my video on the betrayal of Lord Nelson. I'll link it at the end of the video and in the description. I think it's half decent. It's worth a watch. But in its simplest form, it saw the British define themselves in opposition to the European identity and what they saw as destructive, but most importantly gay, revolutionary politics, informed by emotion above stoicism.
No, I don't have feelings, because feelings are gay.
Further propelling them toward their international imperial community and market. And let's be honest, is there truly a more enlightened state than modelling yourself in opposition to France? I wouldn't have thought so, but if their victory over the Spanish in 1588 had been the springboard for their naval dominance, then the defeat of Napoleon in 1814 was the— wait, what the fuck?
He's back! He's back!
Then the second defeat of Napoleon in 1815 was the proverbial cannon that the British climbed into that shot them to the fucking moon. The whole saga deepening this sense of British exceptionalism and distrust of centralized European power, encouraging a worldview separate from the continental priorities and conflicts. The rivalry that had persisted since 1066 had finally seen its victor, and Britain emerged as the undisputed dominant global power, committing some unforgivable evils along the way, like founding Belgium. We do have things to repent for, but finding themselves in the position of world policemen. Now, this is a position that I'm sure a lot of Americans today can identify with. It doesn't make you very well liked internationally, imposing yourself in the affairs of other nations, which is the prerogative of a dominant empire. After all, proud nations don't like having to look up. But don't worry, guys, anti-Americanism will cease when we're in the Chinese concentration camps together. It's really not that deep. When your power is no longer undisputed, just make a few good albums and the world, by and large, seems to forgive you of your sins. It's fucking easy. But I will say the clock is ticking to, end global slavery, so to speak. You've got to do something generationally based, some real big dick shit if you want to be, if you want to be able to gaslight yourself into justifying the fuckeries. Don't let it have been for nothing is what I'm trying to say. Don't be a Spain. Do you know what I mean? That's those are words to live by.
Jacob, where you go? Jacob! Come back, Jacob!
But the point is, by the 19th century, this 20-mile stretch of water that had once seemed so negligible, it may as well have been 20,000 miles. The distance between Britain and the European continent had never been so stark. But by the turn of the century, Britain found themselves in a very odd position. They looked around them, and where there had once been great global European empires, they now saw nothing but cringe. As far as the eye could see, centralized powers, no better than godless republics.
I'll fucking shove a fucking magnet down your throat and watch your fucking face implode.
You see, they posed a massive threat, not only because of their jealousy, but they could afford to focus their attention and might entirely on the European continent rather than all around the world. Not to mention the remnants of these fallen empires, the anti-imperialism was on the rise. The only other great empire still standing, France. In a rapidly changing and modernizing new world, the ancient enemies, the rivalry that had built the world, found themselves natural allies. Begrudging and distrusting allies, but allies all the same. And this alliance, from a contemporary perspective, was a bit jarring to say the least. But the reasons for it were pretty easily understood, and they were as follows. Germany. What can I say? Always up to no good, these lots. But it has to be said that fighting side by side for 4 years of unprecedented bloodshed does a surprising amount to bind two peoples together, actually. The relationship advice that I've always lived by. Not that they always have. Skill issue. Make sure you're the one with the gun, not the ammo. Do you know what I mean? They don't always make it. But this was a lesson that Britain would learn just 22 years later with the fall of France in the opening phase of the Second World War.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
Leaving Britain alone to hold the door against hopeless odds while rallying support in opposition to the mainland continent, just as they had against Napoleon. That once again the Channel had been the point of difference. The drawbridge would be raised, the continent saved, and the island mentality returned. You see, by 1945, Britain had emerged victorious from the Second World War, but you'd be pretty hard-pressed to say that they won. The only major power to fight both wars from start to finish on what many Britons saw as a point of principle, and it had cost them the sum total of their historic achievements. Their cities lay in ruin, their economy spent, their debts through the roof, and their empire, their international community, their lifeline from the continent, had crumbled with all the flaccidity of a Greek man in Saudi Arabia. And it left them in this very odd position. You see, change, particularly in Britain, has always been a very slow-moving thing. Naturally, they still held the same 500-year mentality they had only years ago, with the world at their fingertips, only now without the position, and it provided them this very in and out mentality in regard to Europe that you might recognise today. Now, there was an emphasis on cultural integration as displayed by Churchill.
We hope to see a Europe where men of every country will think as much of being a European as of belonging to their native land.
But they also remained notably absent from the Treaty of Rome, the birth of the EEC, a precursor to the EU, emphasizing trade in the effort to avoid future warfare and rebuild the continent. But from the British perspective, it was one thing to sacrifice everything you have to save the continent, but getting along, being friends, working to get... Well, I don't know about you, but this all sounds awfully gay to me. That just ain't monkey business, and it was under these circumstances that Britain was later denied entry. Twice. By the French. Imagine my shock.
Alors il est possible qu'un jour l'Angleterre parvienne à se transformer elle-même suffisamment pour faire partie de la communauté européenne sans restriction, sans réserve et de préférence à quoi que ce soit. Et dans ce cas-là, les six lui ouvriraient la porte.
Now, this is the part of the video where I have to say some very unforgivable things. Believe me, if I could instead just scream the N-word out of my window here, it would somehow be preferable. So when I utter these words, we never speak of it again. Anyone mentioning it in the comments will be banned and swatted. De Gaulle was right to do this. He was right, about more than I care to give him credit for, useless, ungrateful, valor-stealing rat that he was. But he was correct to assert that Britain, with their more global outlook, would not be content in a mere regional trading bloc. Now, from his perspective, Britain was simply not compatible with mainland Europe. They were too close with America, a cultural Trojan horse as he saw it. Europe would not become a mere colony of the Anglosphere and their historically entrenched and shared liberal values. Their economies were mismatched in regard to EEC policy. They followed contradicting legal systems, not to mention France was worried about a challenge to their leadership and suspicious of British intentions. Their economy had been tanked by the war. Surely they only wanted entry to bail themselves out. When the moment came for Britain to finally truly become a European nation, 1,000 years of history in the making, the differences by now were simply too stark. Their ancient rivalry with France, their point of contact with the mainland, had endured too long to put aside mistrust. The trajectory that their own insular reformations and therefore enlightenment put them on resulted in incompatible values, politics, laws, philosophy, economics, and perspectives, which forced their gaze away from the continent for simply too long. The British were a part of Europe, but they were not European.
The future is...
Well, I say all that, but to leave the EU, you of course have to have been in it, which by 1973 they were, to a pretty flaccid, soggy response in regard to the public and political. Why? Now, this is a bit of a waffly point to make. It's not particularly academic or worth its weight in karma, but it is something that I think about a lot, and it's this sense of an island mentality. That it breeds a very distinct sense of home, of identity, of insular culture, and of history, as silly as the realities of it probably are in the modern world. You know, if the Russians want to cross the channel, well, you best believe that they'll form a bridge of bodies like that scene from the Dragon show. Yeah, that's the one. Perfect. Yeah, that one. But as the world becomes more interconnected, maybe this cultural isolationism will cease and open us up. You know, if we can wank over videos of the Japanese displaying very standard levels of social etiquette, then surely we can wank over French displays of social etiquette if such a concept does exist. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it breeds arrogance, but it can put you in a bit of a bubble. After all, Britain had not been invaded, they had not been occupied, they had not been defeated or humbled, not in the Second World War, nor for the last 1,000 years, and it didn't create this same sense of urgency for broader European solidarity, as much as it was seen as, as a means to an end economically, and this is something that we still see today. The most prominent argument within the Remain and now of course the Rejoin campaign is far and away the economic vision, well above the cultural or the idealistic, whereas the Leave rhetoric was sold entirely on the opposing idealistic vision. This idea of, fuck these gay weirdos, there's an entire world out here to trade with beyond the incompatible restrictions we find in Europe that, that don't infringe on our values. It is fascinating how little a country can really change its DNA. That's rhetoric from the Elizabethan penis mummy era. And Remain, they're gonna have me strung up outside the Brewdog for saying this, but that's rhetoric from Thatcher, the second penis mummy era. Now, her rhetoric was a bit more Brexiteer, but her whole thing with the EU was that she looked at it entirely transactionally. The money, the trade, the investments Britain could reap from its membership. And I make this point purely to highlight that on either side of the debate, for or against, the historical DNA is still present, and we see this with Britain's refusal to adopt the euro, to keep their options beyond Europe open. Or is it? You see, in 1997, who enters the frame but Thatcher's Sith apprentice disguised as the opposition, Big Tone.
Oh shit, wow, here's the beige fucking Power Ranger now.
And it seemed that, finally, Britain was a fully cooperating European partner, enthusiastically accepting the policies from Brussels. Things that would help integrate us, make us inseparable, a real part of the European family. Things like free movement.
I prefer really not to speak. If I speak, I am in big trouble. In big trouble.
Stuff that always goes hand in hand with a global economic crisis. And the rest, as they say, is history. No, I do not care to get bogged down in the specifics of 2016. I think we've all had our lifetime's worth, and I'm sure the comment section of this video is dancing on the edge of DEFCON 5 or 1 or whatever the fuck the cringe one is. We're getting dangerously close to it, but I can't exactly hope to conclude this video without touching on it at least a little bit. It is, after all, the culmination of all of the above. Now, I was fairly young in the before times, and far more concerned with pretending to understand my girlfriend of the time's obsession with crystals and Fallout Boy while juggling a crippling drug addiction myself, by which I mean to say maxing my old school RuneScape account than I was in politics. But I did not succeed. A 360p download of March of the Penguins is a fucking bizarre way to get yourself a keylogger, take it from me, but if memory does in fact serve, and I should point out here that I am council estate scum, so yes, immigration was a big concern in my neck of the woods, but I think it's wrongfully taken centre stage in our recollection. But at least from my experiences, the people around me, it was more of a subset to the main carnal sin perceived to have been committed by the EU. Democratic silly buggers.
She's coming across like a Nazi float at the fucking Notting Hill Carnival.
Now, I'm not going to come down on either side of this accusation. It's a bit too complicated for the scope of this video. Right or wrong, all that matters is the perception, the optics. And as we have discussed, in the birthplace of modern representative democracy hardened by European political opposition, this is arguably the most sacred British value there is.
Let me indulge in the floxy-knocking nihilopilification of judges of the European Union.
We might not shoot our neighbours' cats for trespassing while violently screaming freedom at their bleeding out corpses, but don't think for a second that we don't wank over this stuff all the same. And we find ourselves today at a crossroads. Where do we go from here? Are we destined to continue our slow drift away from the continent, or is reintegration inevitable? I don't fucking know, man. I just like wanking over dusty old tomes. If I gave half a shit about the modern world that actually exists around me, I wouldn't be able to tell you why inserting a contingent of elves into the Battle of Helm's Deep is a law-breaking change from the books, would I? You see, by the end of the Third Era, the time of the elves is coming to an end. Oh, fuck it, we've come this far after all, I may as well have a crack. Well, as of recent events, there's been growing ties between Britain and Europe, and attempt to rekindle a more effective relationship. Now, is this the path to rejoining the EU? Well, It seems very unlikely anytime soon, and maybe these recent events simply set the tone for our relationship moving forward. Partners, but not members. That maybe de Gaulle continues to be right. Maybe historical identity just runs too deep. As I say, how much can nations really change their DNA, their ingrained experiences and nuances that make us who we are, nations and people alike? Pierre, I'm sure, is destined to continue overly preparing his government in the face of whimsical rioting to the extent that it serves no viable purpose but to burden the taxpayer.
It's amazing! It's unbelievable!
Pedro, I'm sure, is destined to continue stabbing cows, as is Zhao to go on being based and shaving the disproportionately large amount of body hair of their female population to craft high-grade fishing nets. Maybe the same could be said of Barry 63. Maybe we'll never be seen as, as European as France or Germany. Maybe we'll never see ourselves as such, but that doesn't mean to say that we can't be cooperative. Cooperative but distant, a fringe member, the bridge between Europe and the Anglosphere. But for all the EU-aboos amongst you, there is yet hope. At this very moment, of recording at least, as I waffle on incoherently and you, a ham sandwich resting on your third belly, eyes wide with anticipation of my next surely life-changing words of wisdom, the UK Parliament is discussing a bill that will very possibly cause this national disagreement to solve itself. You see, the younger generation is far more enthusiastic about Europe, far further from the memory of exceptionalism, far more sceptical of our international relationships. So, what is this bill I speak of that will deliver us to the promised land? The Assisted Death Programme. You see, if this bill gets passed with no hiccups, we might just be back in Europe by tea time on Thursday. People of the future, please let us know in the comments. Were the older generation the last to hold these views of a dying, antiquated Euroscepticism, the legacy of a Britain gone by, and did rounding them up deliver us to the promised land? And I would just like to end by saying, I wouldn't let any of this concern you too deeply. If there is just one thing worth taking away from our history, is that we always seem to muddle through and find a way. Or maybe that's just my British exceptionalism shining through, in which case I might just propose the idea of an altogether different future. And if we break down this video to its simplest form, it sounds both ridiculous yet obvious to say that the differences between us that can at times feel so distinctively massive really do just go back to this 20-mile stretch of water. And this fat piece of shit. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe. Fuck, get some xenophobia going in the comments. If you like, go wild. It all helps. It don't actually, obviously. Fucking hell. See you later.